Hello everybody again. For those who don't know me, although I think we met with most of you, I'm Karina Angelieva, Deputy Minister for Education and Science and host of this wonderful event. Today we have our tradition. During each European contest for young scientists, usually we are trying, the national organizers with the support of the Commission and the host country, always to have something, an initiative where young people can maybe learn a little bit from experienced researcher, or to have the opportunity to pose daring questions to them, or just to jog their minds before the awards ceremony tomorrow. So I hope you enjoy this fantastic Café Scientifique. We have very interesting guests, and I hope they will inspire and support you in your next challenging ideas in your profession and your career. I also very much want to thank all other guests and friends that were able to come today enjoy our event. And to all those who were not able to come, but they are following now online, because this event is streamed, I would like to wish also enjoy and ask as many questions as you want. And now please allow me to our first honorable guest and my dear colleague, Denica Sacheva, Deputy Minister of Education and Science. Denica? Professor Littlewood. Professor Mishkova. Professor Kabatiansky. And maybe some of you is not surprised, but I wonder if you're going to recognize her today, Dr. Claire Lee. Please. Now I leave you in the skillful hands of Denica, and I wish you a great enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kari. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here today and to try to be a moderator of this session. Actually, I've never been in one and the same room with so many clever people because, as you understood, I'm working in politics, and if I make a mistake, I guess you are going to forgive me. So let me first introduce our dear panelists. So first, if I have to read all the CVs of the panelists, maybe it will take us an hour, so you will allow me to shorten your CVs very to the most important that is relevant for our audience. So Professor Peter Littlewood is a professor of physics at the University of Chicago, who was previously director of Argonne National Laboratory, and before that a professor of physics at the University of Cambridge and head of the Cavendish Laboratory. His research interests include superconductivity and superfluids, strongly correlated electronic materials, collective dynamics of gases, density waves in solids, neuroscience, and applications of materials for energy and sustainability. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of London, the Institute of Physics, the American Physical Society, the TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences. He serves on advisory boards of research and education institutions and other scientific organizations worldwide. Associate Professor Dr. Diana Mishkova, she holds a PhD in modern history from the University of Sofia, where she was working as a senior assistant and later as associate professor in modern and contemporary history of Southern and Eastern Europe. She is visiting professor in too many universities all over Europe. I counted more than 10 countries, so maybe you have seen her somewhere in Europe. She's convener of 12 major international projects, and she participates also in another 18. She is member of editorial boards of numerous scientific magazines, and her areas of specialization are modern and contemporary history of Southeastern Europe, comparative intellectual history, history of modern political ideas, conceptual history, historiography. Dr. Claire Lee is a South African particle physics research associate at the US Department of Energy's Brookhaven National Laboratory. Claire works on the ATLAS experiment, one of the multi-purpose experiments at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. Her current research focuses on precision measurements of standard model electroweak processes with latest data from the LHC and studying the prospects for such measurements in the future with high luminosity LHC and upgraded ATLAS detector. I guess that's, except me, all of you understood what I have just read. Claire was integrally involved in South Africa's joining of the ATLAS collaboration in 2010 and obtained her PhD from the University of Johannesburg. And our last participant on this, as you can see, quite holistic panel, because we have researchers and scientists from various different areas, is Professor Gregory Kabatansky, who works for Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology and has previously held positions at the Scientific Research Institute for Automatic Devices Moscow, in Paris, Texas, and also other universities. In total, he has 40 years of experience as a researcher in the field of coding theory, cryptography, and discrete mathematics. His research interests include error-correcting codes, both constructions of such and bounds for existence, secret sharing schemes, digital fingerprinting, and bounds for packing in different spaces where he obtained the important Kabatansky-Levenstein bound with Vladimir Levenstein. So, I'm very much interested and curious in what is in front of us for this panel. I guess you too. There is a free Wi-Fi in this meeting room which you can use, and also you can share your questions on Twitter and on the social media of EUCYS. The panel is going to be with the following organization. Each of our guests is going to give his perspective on the value of science for the future of humankind. And then we will going to have approximately 20 minutes Q&A session for all the panelists. It's going to be very important and very interesting to see the various different viewpoints, because science these days is something that is extremely debated, whether it serves or whether it threatens humankind, whether we are now living in a new Babylon or are we living in a new Renaissance. Is everything happening so quickly as we are threatened all the time by media that we are lagging behind, that there are new and new technologies every day? Is this true, having in mind that it's 22 years since Deep Blue beat it Garry Kasparov on chess, and since then still people are playing chess? Is really everything happening so quickly as we are all the time being threatened? So these are a number of different and provocative questions, and having said that, let me give the floor first to our first panelist, Professor Peter Littlewood.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you first for inviting me here. I mean, I want to say, I'm sure on behalf of everybody here, what fun it has been to wander around the hall and look at the work that's been going on and all of the stuff that you have done out there. I mean, it was well said on the first day that the future is actually in your heads. So don't listen too much to what I have to say, because then Olga. But I did want to say something about 2050. And I wanted to say something about energy and sustainability. It's a topic on all of our minds. By 2050, we have to be at least carbon neutral, if not actually carbon negative. we really have no choice in that. That's already a bit late, as many of you will know. I'll say a few things on the positive side about on the way to doing that. It's interesting now that we have, in terms of generation of power, it's now cheaper to make electricity from solar and from wind than it is from coal, from natural gas, from nuclear, and almost anything else. That's a shift which has happened very rapidly over the past decade. And already we've installed probably close now to 2 terawatts of capacity at a cost of a little over $2 trillion, but we're now running at a price point of $1 per watt. The world needs 30 terawatts. That's about $30 trillion then, and actually that's a small number. Go compare that to global GDP. Right? So the issue isn't money. Maybe getting people to spend the money, but it's not money. The issue, however, is to get to scale, because getting from where we are now to where we need to be is really an enormous one. It involves vast amounts of work on many technologies. And some of the technologies we actually have, we have pretty good solar, we have rather good wind, we have almost good enough batteries for electric vehicles. But we need to have major progress there. But there are many other things that we need to do. We need to decarbonize large parts of chemistry. We need to stop producing ammonia by heating up nitrogen and steam to a very high temperature. It uses about 5% of the world's natural gas, produces close to 2% of our CO2 emissions, and there are many processes like that. And there's a lot of work to be done to invent new things. And the invention begins actually with fundamental insight into materials, to physics, to chemistry, but also a link of that across to the social science disciplines, to the environmental disciplines, to make sure that these things move smoothly, and also into policy so that we don't make big mistakes. Example of a mistake, we thought biofuels was great in Europe, so we put in subsidies to do that, particularly in Germany, and that resulted in deforesting large parts of the tropics to put in palm oil plantations. So there are many aspects where what we need to do scientifically, the directions we have to be linked to the society. And let me stop there, because I'm sure there's lots of you thinking hard about this problem, and maybe we can come back on some of these things.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the thoughts that you share. Associate Professor Miškova, please give your vision.
Thank you also for this invitation. As you can see, I'm the black sheep in this company, representing the whole of humanities, usually conceived as the very opposite of science in terms of intellectual structures, departmental structures, but also in terms of epistemological conflicts, as it were. Now, since we were first invited to make a brief statement that would be a sort of profession of faith, as it were, I would say the following, something which might be predictable for some of you. Namely that I would like to look at the future of science from the point of view of the issues of ethics, values, moral responsibility. And I think this is absolutely vital, and I think that historically we have sufficient examples of what horrors befall us when science becomes detached from ethics and from values and from the moral compass that arts and humanities are providing us with. Think of the experiments with human beings in the Nazi concentration camps or the dropping of the atomic bomb. So we have inherited from the 20th century a lot of examples of highly technological societies involving themselves in highly barbaric acts. The ancients once believed that those who engage in science should have had proper education, should have been properly trained in arts, because otherwise they wouldn't have the character, they called it character, to perform adequately and properly science. We can hear nowadays similar judgments on the part, for example, of bioethicists, people engaged in bioethics, namely that they voice concern over doctors who have, with no background in philosophical, indeed humanistic thinking, as being unprepared or ill-equipped to tackle, to make sound judgments about the very hard, very difficult ethical questions that arise constantly in medicine today. So, at the same time, we could also see economic interest, economic need, getting increasing control and coming to the forefront as the major, if not the only factor that governs our decisions. So my plea would be in both school and academic and university that we operate with truly holistic curricula that is integrating the different areas of knowledge into one holistic curricula. Put emphasis on excellence, because we want to have technically well-equipped specialists, but we also want to have morally responsible ones. So put emphasis on the cultivation of excellence, but excellence for human purpose.
Thank you, Associate Professor Mishkova. I couldn't agree more, because technical capability by itself does not guarantee morality. And in this, I think that actually the debate about ethics is equally important as all debates about technology. Dr. Claire Lee, what do you think? What is the value of science for the future of humankind?
So I'm going to actually follow on from this point here, talking about ethics. So I'm a particle physicist. I work at CERN, which is the European Organization for Nuclear Research. It's a big particle physics laboratory. We have this big tunnel underground, 27 kilometers long. We're hoping to build a 100-kilometer one, where we smash protons together. And the nice thing about particle physics is that we really don't have to worry about the protons' feelings when we're smashing them together. There's not really much ethical issues when we're just talking about smashing particles. But, we also do have an obligation to pay attention to our impact on the environment. And this is something that CERN monitors very closely. Also, one of the nice examples that I can give is back 25 years ago, a group of scientists at CERN were working, and they wanted to figure out how to send messages to each other. So they developed the World Wide Web. And this is now what we use every day. We're using it on Twitter right now for people to tweet and to send messages and to WhatsApp each other. All of this stuff is based on the World Wide Web, which was developed at CERN, and importantly, given for free to the community. If we had like 1 cent for every time somebody used the World Wide Web, we wouldn't need to beg for funding to build future accelerators, because we would just have enough stuff. But I think that's really, really important, because it shows how just doing what seems to be pretty arbitrary fundamental research ends up having these fantastic practical things that are useful for the world every day. But of course, use of the internet actually comes with a big responsibility. And if I have to think about the future and what is possibly the biggest crisis that I think we face, yes, we've got climate change, we have got, wars and immigration issues and all sorts of things. But I think, personally for me, the most critical issue is this culture of anti-intellectualism, where people end up wearing ignorance as a badge of pride. And, you know, we have got all of these problems that we have to deal with. And the only way we are going to be able to solve them is if we start paying attention to what the scientists are telling us, paying attention to the warnings that they're issuing us, and you know, developing future technologies to deal with this. So this is something that I think all the young people here, this is something that you know you can actively start working on today. Just the fact that you guys are all here at a science contest, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. You're not the issue. It's other people, the people who would shun the idea of a science competition. And I think that is the thing that we really have to fight, because we need a culture that accepts science before we can have a world that is using science to solve its problems.
I like this message very much. We need a culture that accepts science, and I think that actually with a contest like this is what we try to do. We try to make the profession of the scientist more popular, and also we try to build a little bit more trust in science and more trust in facts, because we all are suffering from the distrust in fact, and especially what I like much is what you just said, that we have to fight those that wear ignorance as a badge of pride. So thank you very much for this very valuable contribution. And Professor Kabatiansky, what's your point of view about the value of science for the future of the humankind?
You see, I will start slightly from different point. Of course, future for the mankind, it's very important. But I think that the young people sitting here, they are mainly reserved about their own future. And it's not my first time when I sit, say, opposite to such big young auditorium. And I always try to imagine if I were you, what I will choose to do. Say about 5-6 years ago, I will choose bioinformatics, because it looks very promising. It looks like we can, of course, the gene program, we should know in a close future how we are, in fact, we are constructed and then repair ourselves. And of course, different dreams that all we will live more than 100 years and be healthy. Okay, mankind is always waiting for a miracle, but that miracle was postponed a little. Nowadays, if I were you, I will go to artificial intelligence, better say machine learning. And it's already mentioned that, it's so many years when the Deep Blue won against Kasparov. A couple of years ago, maybe it's already 3, I was in Korea exactly at the time when the corresponding match also has happened. Now, that time was in Go. It's much more complicated game, but machine say so. Again won against one of the best players. So it looks like, finally we will find solution which makes us happy from the point of view that the robots will do everything for us. No, they don't. I don't think that they will, first of all, they will do science. It's one thing. Second thing, I also don't think that they will do some easy job, like plumbers. Or we can do some devices which will be unbroken. It's other way around. But thinking about it, I suddenly came to the mind that when I was in your age, and if somebody tell me, okay, let's go to machine learning, I will not go to that direction, because I have a very strong intention to do math. Later on I switched to applied math, but anyway, my advice, just do what you love to do. Not look at what is more important right now, because if you do good science, you will always find satisfaction in all senses of this word.
Okay, thank you very much for this contribution and for this message to our audience to do what they love. Actually, while you were talking about the artificial intelligence, I also remembered that actually the book Frankenstein of Mary Shelley, it was written 101 years ago. And if you, for those of you that don't recall exactly the book, there is a monster that doesn't have a name. It's a sort of an artificial intelligence at that time, which turned out to Dr. Frankenstein and said, you might be my creator, but I am your master. So I think that maybe the importance of the institutions, the scientists' institutions, universities, is actually that they have to make creators that are actually masters of their creations, which is maybe the big debate when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Since we don't yet have any questions, and I'd like to strongly encourage you to put your questions on Twitter, I'd like to make maybe another very quick round among our panelists on the topic of time, which is important. Time from one point of view that many people maybe they love science as fans, but they don't want to go deep into science because they don't have the patience and think that they will need to invest a lot of time in science. But also there is a couple of other people that are quite neurotic because everybody keeps on saying them that they are lagging behind simply because they're not so fast with technologies. So what are your two messages to those two type of groups? To those that are hesitating to start with science, what is your message to them in terms of time? And to those that feel a little bit uncomfortable, that they don't really understand science and that they're not very well with technologies and that they to a certain extent feel irrelevant to our time. So maybe starting again from you.
Okay, if you'll allow me just one thing on the previous round,
sure.
which I didn't.
Of course, sure.
So I just want to make a comment about original sin. So I'm a physicist, and as a background of a physicist, all of the things that physics have been used for very bad things and for very good things. At the time when they were created, and we're doing this now with AI, you do not know what will come next. So that argues absolutely from a very early stage for an engagement with all of this. Okay. So, no, by the way, if you're thinking about science and you find it hard, you worry about it, you'll sort of be like me when I was your age. The reason I did physics was because it was the subject that required me to memorize the least. Right, so the principle, there's a subject where you can take some rules and you follow the rules and you get an answer. And it's easier than it looks, much easier than it looks, and the more you practice, the easier that it gets. But the other one that I would also say is, to follow your soul in terms of what do you want to do to change the world. To think about what you can do, what you're inspired to do, where you want to go, how you want to do that. Now, science may not be all of that, but it may well be a small part of that. And as you start constructing your own future, think about how it fits in, and think about how you can learn and pull in the strands, right, of these things. So that's my advice as an individual to do that.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mishkova?
Well, this question doesn't really address the kind of sciences I represent and feel more or less competent to tackle. But if I may, I would shift it a little bit and make it even more difficult for this audience. Namely, why I think it is worthwhile investing even more time into engaging with humanities, arts and humanities on the part of science students. It is not an easy it's not an easy bite, it's not an easy way, there is no easy way to lure you into this. First of all, because it's so very clear that at present the jobs you can get if you get into science, the payment you can get, the career prospects you can get if you're really good science are much better than if you're engaging in human and social sciences. So you may have very good reasons to ask, why the hell should I have a course in, let's say, ancient philosophy or contemporary literature or something like this? If I have to answer such a question, I've been privileged to actually to preach in front of believers, namely students who had already chosen my subject or my field. But if I have to confront an audience like this one, made mainly of scientists, if not only of scientists, I would say the following. In your classes of, in science, in technology, in maths, your professors would tell you, this is how things are. They give you facts, knowledge, truth. In your humanity, they give you certainty. Humanities give you uncertainty, doubt, and skepticism. They teach you how to subvert the claims. It is subversive. Humanities are subversive. They teach you how to subvert the claims made by any authority, be it political or scientific or religious. So they actually, in this way, they actually teach you more and more properly, in my view, about where we come from, what we can be or should be, in the way of constantly questioning our beliefs about these issues. Of course, along the way, science had done a lot to help us address all these questions, what we are, where we come from, what you can, it should be, and so on. But humanities at the same time teach us that we have, as humans, huge capacity of deluding ourselves, and that each of us is a unique human being, different from any other human being, and that we keep changing. And that also applies to society. In other words, we as humans, in certain important respects, resist what science teaches us about the world and about ourselves. So I think that ultimately it all boils down to our capacity of critical thinking, and creative thinking, of course, which is at the core of any innovation. Recently, just a couple of months ago, the UK Minister of Education, I think the full name is Minister for Universities, Research, Science and Innovation. This is the full title. He reported that he'd been stunned by the fact that in his communication with foreign education ministers across the globe, all of them praised, or rather shared their admiration for the UK higher education system, not only for its quality, but for its capacity to produce graduates with deeply embedded critical thinking skills. And this is what I think humanities and humanities education brings about.
Thank you. That was a very clear viewpoint why we should invest time in teaching and studying humanities.
In science courses.
In science courses,
as part
yes.
of science courses. Yeah.
So, Dr. Lee, what's your viewpoint about the time and investment in time?
So, first of all, anyone who's ever known anything about quantum mechanics would know that the fundamental principle about quantum mechanics is that everything is uncertain. You can't know anything for any certainty. So while I also agree that teaching humanities, or at least do learning some philosophy or something like that, is actually really important. there are probably more parallels between the lessons that you are describing and actual science than we think. But you know, there is no rule written down anywhere that says, if you like science, then you have to do science and you can't do humanities. And if you don't like science, then you have to do humanities and you can't do anything else. There's no law that says that. You can do, somehow, you know, there seems to be this thing going on in the world where people feel like they have to choose one or the other, but really you don't. If you like doing science and you want to do science 100% of your time, then go and do science 100% of your time. If you only want to spend like time doing a little bit of science, there are actually a number of really great projects, citizen science projects. For example, there's the SETI at home, but we also have LHC at home, where you can use your idle computing power to help us run simulations of the proton-proton collisions happening inside the LHC at CERN. So all of these things are there and available for people to actually do, and then they can be part of something and contribute something. I saw so many of these projects, I think, have a lot of these collaborative aspects as well. There's a really great astronomy one, which is linking up astronomical observations with telescopes with people. So people can do this in their spare time as their hobby, and they can actually make a contribution to the world. You don't have to have a degree in science to do this, and you don't have to have a career in science to make a contribution to the world. I think you said it really nicely. What we need is people to be passionate. I think this is one of the things that the world really needs is people who are passionate. I'm a fundamental scientist, and I often get asked, why should we be doing fundamental science? Why can't we just focus on things that are more practical? And the way I see it is doing fundamental research. It's a type of exploration and pushing boundaries. To build the LHC, we dug a tunnel, and we had to invent everything from the magnets to the parts of the detector that detect the particles, to our computing technology to handle the data flow coming out of this. We had to invent everything from scratch as we went along. It's this huge, exploration into the unknown. And it's not unlike people who go and climb Mount Everest or scuba dive, or free dive to, these crazy depths. It's a similar type of, passion for exploration that I think is extremely human. So I think fundamental research is something that brings us a lot of humanity as well. I'm totally digressed off the topic of the questions, which was advice to people for I think if I had to give advice to people who don't, I think it's just as I said, you can do some citizen science projects. There are loads of things where you can contribute to projects without having to make it your career. And I think the more people that do that, the better.
You're quite right about this, and especially about the fact that fundamental research actually is exploration of the unknown. But at the same time, there is a lot of fear, and you know that currently we are in all the political forums and all political agenda, we're always talking about STEM and the motivation of more people to go to STEM disciplines, because obviously this is a problem all over the world, that people are a little bit going away from the STEM disciplines because they simply because they're afraid to a certain extent whether this is going to be something more difficult for them, whether this is going to be is there going to be a good future for this? For example, in Bulgaria at the moment we are doing a lot of policy measures in the area of engineering, science, mathematics for the higher education, because for many years there was more people are going to other disciplines like international relations, psychology actually is one of the top disciplines in the university. How do we take out this fear, that actually take away the fear from people to start and to be more interested in STEM disciplines. This is also part of the question, because this fear obviously is also transformed into the doubt whether science serves humanity or whether science serves for example, certain selfish goals, or maybe certain money goals, as you mentioned the topic about money. So how do we take out the fear that science is controversial towards humankind? This is more or less the debate that we are having now. But thank you very much for your words, and going back to Professor Kabatiansky.
Thank you. Now, look, guys, first of all, I would like to send you a word of caution. Doing science cannot be a part-time job. On the other hand, it's a rather pleasant job. And I love the phrase which was said once by one of famous Russian physicists. He said that doing science means to satisfy your curiosity by government money. So don't be afraid to do science. On the other hand, of course, it's not an easy just walk. No, it's sometimes it's hard job. Sometimes you failed because you think that you get something, and finally you find no, it was even the wrong approach to something. Right now you're just in the beginning of your way, and I was really inspired to see how many original ideas you expressed in your stance. So just do science. And by the way, I do not share science on natural sciences or social sciences. There is a right word for this, what means doing science. In Bulgaria, as well as in Russia, and in many other countries of the former Eastern Europe, this word is very, let's say, looks unpleasant, but do speculation, just think. As I love to say to my American students, try to think, it doesn't hurt.
So I need to interject here, because I'm not entirely certain if you were joking when you said science has to be a full-time thing or not.
No, I think I'm okay. Of course, you will have time for all other things, like love, travels, etc. But you should know as well as me that when you sleep, you continue to think. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. I mean, yeah, because I wanted to sort of disagree with that. I think you can, and people should take time to do hobbies that are not like having to do with science for their own personal health and well-being. I went running on top of the Vitosha mountain yesterday, because I love to run and hike. And you can have a family, and I had my kid while I was doing my PhD, and we all moved over to CERN when he was 1, so it's absolutely possible for you guys to have the career you want and do the hobbies you want and have the families and the life that you want, even if you are doing science. Just put that out there.
So thank you for this encouragement, Dr. Lee.
That you're not some kind of queer creature.
Yeah, I don't have alien eyes or anything like that. I'm a normal human being.
And actually, to continue your joke, Professor Kabatiansky, in Bulgarian, what we say is think, because thinking can solve a lot of your problems. Are there any questions from the audience so far? Because we are running a little...
One over there.
There is one over there. Yes, please. Could you please hold for a second? There is a microphone coming to you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Test. Yeah, so do you think you're exceptionally good at what you do, or what are your thoughts on natural talent? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very provocative question. Shall we start this time
No,
from
no,
you?
just that way. I even didn't understand what it means.
Come on, don't be shy.
Of course I'm good at what I do.
What do you mean?
Let me
Oh,
offer
we
a
have
slightly
so
different-
many modest people in this panel.
Let me offer a slightly different take on this bit. I choose what I do, and I choose things that I'm good at, and then I try and convince everybody else that they should be interested in it. That's actually one way that you can make a living, actually, and it's so understand, if you like, that we don't burrow away in dark caves. Well, I mean, I guess you do some of the time. We're working in large groups, a very social environment. It's a very collective operation, right? So most of us are working in big teams, and on those teams, there are not identical people with identical skills. There are different people who bring different perspectives to what they're doing, and that produces a much more rounded and organized output, right? So I often feel that, politics should try this, actually. We regard it as a good idea to get people in a room who have different skills and different ideas and different perspectives and try and produce something collective as a result of that.
Yeah.
That seems to be out of fashion in politics.
Yeah, in the big science that we are working on, diversity really does make our science results better. We've got, you've got people who are top software designers who are writing the code to, make sure that this is an electron. And then you have other people who are really good with statistics, who are combining these measurements together to get more precise measurements of the Higgs boson. And then you have people who like doing hardware stuff, who are actually building the detector components that go inside the detectors and the cabins and the LHC. And one of the things that I really enjoy working on is projections for the future and simulations on how good are we going to be able to measure this 20 years down the line. And I think you put all of this together and you get this really rich set of results from just one experiment, which I think is fantastic.
Actually, the question of the gentleman there was, do you believe in natural talent as well? Or apart from the fact that you all believe in what you do, but do you believe in the natural talent, and do you think that there should be always investment over the natural talent if you want to be with science?
So natural talent is weird, because how do you judge natural talent? If you judge it by test scores, well, I had fantastic marks in high school, and then I got to university, and physics and maths, I was like 50s and 60%, right? But out of my entire undergraduate class of physics people, I am one of 2 people who continued on to do a career in physics, and almost everybody else was better at the marks than me. So I think if you don't judge yourself purely on your test scores, I think that's a very, very important thing. Natural talent comes in many ways, and not all of those ways are reflected in a standardized test. Natural talent could also be the way you lead a group to make an excellent measurement. And that's something that you'll only discover later on in life if you put yourself in that position where you are leading a group. But there are many, many different skills that will help you in a scientific career.
Do you think that you'd like to add up something on the natural talent?
Well, I think that, of course, natural talent exists. There is a saying belonging to one of the greatest mathematicians of both of 19th and 20th century, Henri Poincaré. He said that inspiration, of course, exists, but when it comes, it should find you hard working. Later on you will find in a few years that some talented guys will not get such success that they can be deserved if they work hard, in opposite ways that some people who looks not so talented but working hard, they got really professionally very high levels. By the way, when I was in your age, I love very much to read science fictions. Coming back to Frankenstein, of course, nowadays we all talking about robots, and robots as a word came near from here. It's from Czechoslovakia. I still do not share these two countries. And then next, great interest to robots appears thanks to Isaac Asimov. And my advice, look, it can be found any at internet, his novel, which called Profession. And just to make you interest, it started from the idea that young people get all their knowledge just in 2 days. The first day it's around when they are 5 or 6 years old. They put a special thing on your head and then they start to read and probably write. And then the school looks like a school in States. It's more club than school because they know there will be day of knowledge in the end of the school, and again the corresponding device will find the best profession for this given person. So after that, just think, well, it's not the end of the story. What happened after that? Okay, it's interesting, and it is exactly to all of you. You will find why.
Can I say one more thing?
I just want to mention that we have a lot of
Okay.
Oh,
beautiful
finally
questions.
we got questions.
I just want to say, imposter syndrome is a big thing in academia. Nobody feels like they're good enough. I made a joke earlier, but actually, no, I always feel like I'm not good enough, and everybody else is doing science better than me. So if you're worried about yourself, that's okay. Everybody else is also worried about if they're good enough too. So.
There are so many and so beautiful questions actually that it's very hard for me to start with all of them. I will read them eventually, those of the questions that are not answered here. I will read all of them, but there is one very provocative question. What do you think about Mars colonization?
Awesome.
About what?
Mars colonization.
Well, we're
The
gonna need
colonization
another
of the planet Mars.
soon. We might as well
Oh,
go.
Mars colonization. I was listening Mars.
No, Mars.
Mars.
Do you have
First
some-
of all, I don't think there are some living creatures living on the Mars, therefore it's not colonization
Yeah.
in normal sense of this, as we do it in history.
Go and kill everyone.
I'm sure that it's not. I can easily say that it won't happen in next century, because I'm not responsible for that.
Claire, what do you think?
I
about
think
this?
it's a fantastic initiative, and we should definitely be looking into it. It's part of the exploration of the solar system by humans, and again, it's one of these things where even if we don't end up colonizing the whole of Mars and moving half of the human race over to live there, I'm sure we're still going to develop many amazing technologies that will have amazing benefits back here on Earth. So I think
Yeah.
it's certainly a thing we should do.
Okay, what do you think about the future job market, and do you believe that jobs will be replaced by robots for you?
The jobs will be different. Robots will certainly be there. But the history of always is that every time technology appears, people assume that those jobs are going away, and they do, and there will be no other jobs. But it turns out there are new jobs. And usually the jobs are more interesting. I mean, I actually have a lot of hope for humanists because, my son is a poet, actually. It's quite difficult to make a living as a poet. But in fact, it's probably one of the last jobs that is not going to be easily colonized by robots. And actually, in the time that we have now, where some of the more drudge jobs will be moved out in this. So I mean, I think uninteresting jobs which can be mechanized like law and such, and repetitive manual work, that should leave much more space for using things which really bind the human spirit. Writing science fiction, thinking about humanistic things, writing poetry, and of course there will be the technical jobs that we don't know what they are, managing AI. And I was actually thinking that I think the best way to colonize Mars is actually with AI. That would be a most interesting experiment. And no people.
Yeah, you know that in Saudi Arabia they even have a special ministry that is dealing with Mars.
No, it's not Saudi Arabia, it's United Arab Emirates.
United Arab Emirates.
I know this because I love this country.
Okay, so I asked for begging at the beginning of the...
I even shake hands with the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, but probably the whole ministry is just one person.
And this is actually the whole point, that although theoretically we would also like to see, us conquering that expanding our genius to other planets and so on, what actually happens usually is a competition between great powers, and it's a power game. Who would step first? Who would take more? Just look what's going on the Antarctic and so on. So it's never just about the human mind, the human spirit conquering the world. It is always a political issue. So we should always keep in mind that this is very often the case, the way scientific achievements and scientific dreams become colonized by politicians.
I'm very sorry, but usually I'm more famous by my jokes, so let me say at least a joke about politicians, space, etc. And it's about the already non-existent country. It's about Soviet Union. We have this meeting of 10 people, so-called Politburo, who solved all questions. And so they asked the person, the famous person, Korolev, who was responsible for the space program, and they say, look, what has happened? Americans landed on moon. And he explains and said, no, we should be first. Therefore, you will land on a sun. And say, no, it's not possible. The temperature on the sun is 6,000 degrees. And they reply, we're not fools, we're not stupid. You will land during the night.
There is a question that actually seems to be more directed to what I said, but I'd like you to answer, Associate Professor Mishkova, because it's also an accusation towards the human science, accusation in inverted commas, because there is a young gentleman who is asking, don't you think that worrying about IA becoming our master isn't really an urgent issue? I mean, let's spend more time trying to improve our current knowledge on the field and making our models better so we can actually use them to solve urgent problems. This is something that usually is being said to the human sciences, that actually we are talking too much about the threat from technologies, and because we are not actually investing into technologies to become better and to really solve problems. But it's the human sciences that are fueling the threat. This is a viewpoint of some people. So how do you answer this young gentleman? Shall we invest more to improve the models and a little bit stop talking about the threats, or shall we do this in parallel? What do you think?
I think that we should talk about the threats, and we should develop in parallel our awareness of what the threat is like, and ignorance and the pride with ignorance is actually one of the side effects of this. You can see a lot of technically very skillful yet young people who are absolutely at home in, operating in, with high-tech appliances of all kinds, and at the same time being utterly helpless in front of the larger world, utterly incapable to make sense of what's going on, utterly incapable to make choices. And this is actually something we have to confront very, very seriously. To what extent technological change fills in the vacuum for some kind of quasi-development, for quasi-movement, for quasi-improvement, while at the same time leaving people utterly unprepared for the real world.
There is also another provocative question, which I think also includes me in a way. What would be the incentive for governments to make people more intelligent and less ignorant when smart people who are asked are hard to control? I'll give my answer, but let me first of all see, is there anyone on the panel who would like to talk about this?
Can I pick up a little bit about that, and also a little bit about the dangers of AI? I mean, I think we really misunderstand the dangers of AI. There are some very deep dangers that everybody worries about, and they aren't here yet, and one should worry about those. But the main problem with AI at the moment is us, right? So what we don't understand is the neuroscience and the social science of large populations. To come back to science fiction, there's a famous story of the psychohistorian Harry Seldon, who predicts forward the theory of the universe because he invents the subject of psychohistory, whereby you can actually understand what large numbers of people will be doing statistically in the way they are. That's not at all unreasonable. It turns out that is actually what a lot of modern AI in practice is doing with Google and Facebook and all of these things, to be manipulated to change elections because they can launch memes through culture and run it there. Now, by the way, that is actually science that we need to understand. It's a social science. It's beginning to be quite well developed. It's coming along a lot behind this. But the big point, I think, which comes of this is that we should understand that none of us have free will. Right? I mean, and this is a very important thing to realize, that the whole of human culture is associated with people trying to manipulate other people. That is actually what our brains are wired to do. That is what we are wired to respond to. What science actually is about is in many ways a completely artificial construct, which is against that. There are really things that are absolutely true. I mean, even quantum mechanics is absolutely true, although there's some problem with the predictability of it. And that as scientists, we represent a point of view that we must defend at all costs against the sort of creeping information thing that comes along around us.
In other words, be able to distinguish between fake and truth, right?
That's much of what we do. But as I say, but we should also understand that the science about what we regard as fake and the science about what we regard as true is in many ways unclear.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
So
I mean, you and I can type the same search term into Google and we will get different results because Google is giving me the results that it thinks I want to see, and it'll give you the results that it thinks you want to see. And this is a problem when the world is becoming so much more polarized in terms of left versus right and different views, because when we are exposed to this through social media and through the internet and everything, we're having our own views reinforced back at us. And this is actually a big problem. The world is becoming more and more polarized, and what we really need to do is come more together and be able to talk about this stuff. And I think it's a crazy world nowadays, and you guys are growing up in a world that we did not have. We didn't have the internet and stuff and social media like you guys have. And I think one of the skills that needs to be taught now to people is how to deal with this, this like artificial bubble that you end up being in without having any control over. So you have to be able to take back control and learn how to search for things that actually will have an opposite point of view so you can educate yourself.
There is a very nice article actually on this about echo chambers and bubbling in the latest MIT review, for those of you who haven't read it yet. As I'm the only one from the politics on this panel, I'll maybe answer very briefly to this. Actually, populists are the ones that need ignorant people. Politicians don't need ignorant people. And that is why in the last years, there is a lot of conversation on the political agenda about education, culture, and also science. And that is why the investment in education in all the countries is becoming bigger and bigger. I can share with you that in Bulgaria, for example, in the forthcoming 2 years and in the last 2 years, so within the mandate of our government, we're going to invest €2 billion in education. It's because populism doesn't work anymore. It's destroying democracies, it's destroying actually our normal life, our well-being. And there is no other incentive that is needed for investment in education and science than this, that actually ignorance is already threatening our normal way of life. And as I'm constantly bombarded by questions and messages that we are running out of time, there is one question about health that I would like to raise, and then I will give a final words to all the panelists. You can find, of course, all the questions on Twitter because there is a hashtag EUCYS, and you can see there are actually brilliant questions. I do regret that we don't have more time for answering all of them. So the question about health is the current health expenditure percentage of GDP is 10% and is increasing. How do we change our treatment-based culture to a more efficient prevention-based culture? How should scientists and politicians act to change and build in tradition of the average thief? So, you would like to?
No, I missed something. I'm sorry. What's about health?
There is increasing expenditure on health worldwide, and how do we change our treatment-based culture to more prevention-based culture? And what science can do in this respect?
Somebody made a joke once how, you pay your doctor when you get sick.
Yep.
So, that kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive because he's going to make money when I'm sick. I should be paying him when I'm healthy, and then he's going to try and keep me staying healthy. Okay, I'm not actually advocating that.
No, actually, I mean, I think there are many people who would advocate that, and I think that's a kind of a reasonable way of doing things. I mean, if you notice where the biggest expenditure on medicine is in the United States, which has driven that system to the extremes. And that is getting worse, by the way, because so-called personalized medicine turns out to be personally very expensive. And the pressure to do that works all of the way through the system because the system is driven by money. So I think it's simply a political question. You have to declare health a human right. And in some sense, you have to deny expensive healthcare to make sure that the bulk is done. But it becomes a political issue. I'm not sure that science will solve this easily.
Well, I think there's an interesting quote that goes, a rich country is not a country where, a first world country is not a country where the rich drive cars. It's a country where the rich take public transport. And I guess we can apply it in a similar way here and say a good healthcare country is a country where the rich use the public healthcare system because it is good enough. And I think, if we can work towards a world where that is the design, I think like the NHS in England is actually a very good example of this, something that works pretty well. It's tough, it's really tough, but I think it's something, to have as a goal for the future.
This is a good point on your behalf, but if we're taking this as an example, does it mean that the state is going to be responsible for the competition and for the quality? Because this is also the question that we always faced. Everybody struggles for good public systems, but in the end of the day, everybody says that state is not a good owner, because the competition, the innovation, the creativity goes into the free market. So if everybody uses only the public systems, does it mean that the state eventually will become as equally competitive to the biggest companies? This is also another question.
Well, so, I mean, I think, if you think about how science is funded and the way that we do that, for almost all of us, our money comes from the government. But the government is not in control of what I do. The value of what I do and the success of what I do is determined by my peers. So, you could imagine doing the same thing with medicine. Well, the successful doctor is the one who has the most impact on the quality of life of their patients. You find a way of measuring that. You provide that out there, and of course, I'm going to go and want to go to that doctor. I mean, it's already the case now in these other systems that if I get some nasty disease, I go around and I check and I ask my friend and I say, I want the very best doctor to treat me for this. So I think that quality can be built into that, but it will never be faceless. If you try and make it faceless, if you say it's the state medicine, I turn up there and I don't know who I'm going to see, then that's a recipe for problems.
I really regret that we have only 3 minutes left, but I would like to thank you for all your questions, because they were absolutely brilliant and very inspiring. And since we are lagging behind time, I'd like to give our wonderful panelists the final round for final words, starting from you, please.
First of all, I wish you all guys good luck and big successes in your future life. And remember one thing, science is only the first step. The next step is technology. Remember about that. Otherwise, your science will just stay on the shelf.
Thank you. Claire?
I just want to say thank you to everybody. I didn't get a chance to see everybody's projects today, but the ones that I did saw were absolutely amazing, and I have been so impressed by the innovation and the quality of the science projects that you guys have been doing. Keep it up. You guys are awesome. And I think, no matter what you do here on in life, I think you guys are going to be great.
Diana?
Since university is in front of you, I just want to encourage you, experiment with your talents, with your wishes, with your dreams. Expand as much as the current contemporary university system allows you to do. Just rush from one field to another field. Then you will come up as good personalities, as good minds at the end of at least your undergrad education. And then you can specialize. But before that, ambitiously, ruthlessly expand.
Thank you. And
well, yeah, so I mean, one last comment. So I think we mentioned Richard Feynman at some point earlier. He wrote a really nice book called The Joy of Finding Things Out. And for all of us, actually, I think the wonderful thing about being in science is that you find things out. And often for a short period of time, you're the only person that knows them. And then you get to tell everybody else about it. It can be something small, it can be something big, but it's something that's actually inspiring personally, and I think it's why probably all of us are here, one way or the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for these enjoyable moments in the last 1.5 hours, to be able to spare the time together with these bright minds of our panelists. I would like to wish you all success tomorrow, because tomorrow is the big day where you're going to get your prizes. Tomorrow in Bulgaria we celebrate the day of Sofia. It's the day of faith, hope and love, and their mother Sofia. So faith, hope and love is something that you all need as scientists, but Sofia is the thing that you need the most, because Sofia in Bulgarian means wisdom. So thank you very much.
And in Greek, actually.
Yes.
In Greek, yes.
And thank you very much for your participation and for your wonderful questions. And I'd like you to encourage to give a big round of applause to our wonderful panelists.
And thank you.
Thank you. So glad, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, yep.
Thank you very much.